this section of the experiment, we're going to be working for the first time with our GC, or gas chromatograph. So GC is another type of chromatography that has some similarities to what we've done previously with column chromatography. Now, this works on a slightly different basis and is a much more sensitive technique. So this is an example of one of the columns that we could use for GC. Just going to zoom in on that. If you can read that, this column is approximately 15 meters long and has an inner diameter of 0.25 microns. Now, this column, you can see, is placed inside here, and this is an oven. And when we inject the sample gets injected up here, it gets heated, it comes through the column, and you'll actually notice that there are two columns in here. We have two different injectors on this GC. But the compound or mixture of compounds comes through the column, and we get separation largely on the basis of boiling point. Now, with this instrument, we don't actually run the samples ourselves. What we have here is an auto sampler, which will hold up to 155 samples. One of the reasons for this is that it takes about 10 to 15 minutes for each sample to run. But in addition to that, you use approximately 1 microliter of your compound or your mixture in order to run a GC sample. And so if you've used syringes in the past, or if you never have, syringes this small are really difficult to work with. And they actually break very easily because the plunger on them is so incredibly thin. And so that way our auto sampler lets us do two things. It works on the accuracy. As long as it's set up correctly, the syringes are able to be used for a long time. But most importantly, in the next couple weeks when we do distillation, typically in this lab, if we had, say, 8 groups, each group will create 7 or 8 GC samples from the distillation, and we'll have 50, 60 samples to run. When you multiply that by 15 minutes, it takes 12 to 15 hours to run all of those samples. And so the great thing is that we can just hook up our sample, put all of our samples in, tell the computer what they are, hit go, and we come back the next day and they're done. So the software we use you can find here, and we're going to be running 2 samples today. Our first sample is going to be our mixture of alcohols. And our second sample is going to be our unknown. And you notice it also asks us which position we want to put those in. And hopefully you can make out that says position 1 and 2. And that corresponds to these numbered positions on the auto sampler. So I know this may be kind of hard to see on this video, but every position on the auto sampler has a slot that's assigned to it, a number that's assigned to it. And so 1 and 2 are this position here and here. So now we need to make up our samples. And for GC, making up samples is really easy. Especially if the compound or compounds that you're working with are liquids. So here we have our mixture of alcohols, and this is a mixture of all the possible alcohols that could be in our unknown. all we have to do is take a pipette, and place a few drops into one of these vials. Again, as we said, GC only requires that we have, you know, a couple of microliters to inject into the instrument. Now we do need a little bit more than that, just because of the way the instrument works, but hopefully you can see our vial here is not even a quarter full, and that's more than enough sample to run for GC. We use these special vials, which you can see are sealed up at the top. The syringe will puncture through that red septum and be able to get our sample out. At that point though, the septum has a hole in it, so these vials are used once and never again. And that's our mixture of 5 alcohols. We put that in slot 1. Our second sample has some of the 5 alcohols. And so this is one of our unknowns. And we're going to do the same thing in another brand new GC vial. Small amount goes in there. We'll put the cap with the septum on there. And then we take that over to the GC and put that in slot number 2. Since I'm only running 2 samples today, I'm ready to go. And so over here I click on Save. Now the software knows where my samples are. That's the most important piece, is that you get a title for each sample as well as a position. And then, because I'm ready to go, I click on Start. Now it's giving me a couple of error messages, and so I'm going to go and take care of those. Alright, and then we'll try again. So we should be okay here in a minute. We're just waiting for that to heat up. And once that heats up, we should be ready to go. Alright, and so at this point we're largely waiting for the instrument to get itself ready. As we said, there's an oven here it has to heat up. There's also a filament that needs to heat up. And once those are at the proper temperatures, we should see the auto sampler starting. So that's what one of the things we're waiting for here. Hopefully you can see that. The temperature of our inlet where we inject the sample needs to be up at 225. It's currently heating up. While we're waiting on that, I'll show you that over here are our gas cylinders. Our primary importance is this center one, which is helium. Because what happens is our sample is being heated up and it goes into the gas phase. Once it gets into the gas phase, the helium actually carries it through that column that you saw on the inside. And so that's, we're still waiting. The inlet where we inject the sample is now up to the proper temperature, but the detector, which is supposed to be set at 200, is still heating up. It's up to about 125 degrees. So once that gets there, we should see this ready light stop flashing. It'll look more like, it'll either be blank or it'll be green. And what we have over here on the auto sampler, this is part of what the auto sampler needs to work, is that we have several vials here that are filled with acetone. And so in between each sample, what the GC will do is it will take the syringe, it'll bring it over here to some of the acetone wash bottles, it'll rinse the syringe out, and then in the middle we have a waste bottle for it to inject that sample in. So it looks like it's still going to be a couple more minutes before this is ready to go. So I'm going to stop this video at the moment, and then once it's actually ready to run the samples, we'll pick back up.